So yeah, I'm actually really interested in just talking with you because obviously you're my friend, but and we talk a lot in about different things all the time, but
Hmm.
it's really nice just to carve out some time with someone who's done very interesting things and to find out the mechanisms behind it, the intentions, because what you've done is very unusual. It's like I don't know anyone
I
else
should hope
who's
so. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know anyone else who's attempted it. And what's even more unusual is that you've actually done it, right? So a lot of people
Mhm.
might have this really ambitious goal, and that in and of itself is interesting. And then they might strive towards that goal, which is again interesting, but then they give up,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like they give up maybe in a month, maybe two months, maybe 2 years. But you've been going on your project, which we'll get into in a moment,
Yeah.
for quite a while. So for people listening to this, just a little recap. We first met because you did some intern work with High Existence around 4 years ago. You came to the first Apotheosis retreat where we met in person. That was awesome.
Mhm.
You currently make a living online as a writer, and we are collaborating with High Existence. You are a nightclub bouncer on weekends, and you've been doing this job for 11 years, and you love it.
11
And
years running.
when you describe it, other than the vicious bar fights, it sounds great. When you describe it. Um, you formerly ran an international successful music label, which I don't know much about, with bands from all over the world, some of whom are now signed to major labels. You also used to live in the mountains of India, where you raised money for Human Rights Watch, and you are now a fundraiser for Doctors Without Borders and First Book Canada. And these are background parts of your history that I'm not too aware of. But what I do know you more for is the boxing. So you were a really passionate boxer, and you fought three heavyweight fights in Russia and once in Canada. And there's some photos of you in the ring, like actually fighting, because you're such a friendly, nice guy. I can't imagine you going after someone trying to get a knockout. Um,
Yeah, sometimes neither can I.
but the real the so all of that, if someone's listening to that, they might be thinking, okay, that's really interesting and varied, and like, wow, yeah, this person has some interesting things that they can share with me. Experiencing violence, experiencing fear, experiencing competition, experiencing travel, experiencing business. But here's the thing that really makes you stand out among the people I know in this space is that you're a few. So how old are you?
Just turned 30.
Just turned 30, right?
Yeah.
So just in
Plus,
30.
yeah, I'm closer to 31 than I am to 30.
Okay. We'll round it up.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, so you're 30, which is still young, and you're very
Hmm.
close to having read 1,000 books, like
Yeah.
1,000 books,
163. Just finished that, the 963rd last night.
963rd.
Mm.
And just for people listening, that there you can read books and kind of take shortcuts and kind of like, oh God, this book is so boring. I'm just gonna like put it on 5 times speed on Audible and just get through the thing, right? Like, or just like kind of like half read the titles and then say that I've finished it on Goodreads. But you haven't just read almost 1,000 books. You've actually done a deep analysis of all of the books you've read, and you've taken detailed
Hmm.
notes. So when you read a book, you actually read a book. You actually, take the time, look at the author, um, look at the ideas, connect them to existing ideas, try to find the wisdom between different books that you've read, keep an amazing record of it, an amazing resource that you have with all of these book notes. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the first question that I have is what motivated you, first of all, to begin this crazy adventure of reading? But then the second part is like, what kept you on the path, Because I'm guessing it would have been easy to kind of go, I'll stop doing that for a few months and do this other thing. So yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Seth Godin has a book called The Dip, and it's all about that, but what to do exactly when things get hard, when the project you've taken on gets to a point where, you have a choice, like do you sort of struggle through this dip in motivation or, lack of results, or do you keep going, right? And I definitely felt, the dip at some points too, but I always kept going. The genesis of it was years and years ago. I was back in a job I don't do anymore. I was doing overnight security, and I would be in my car most times. I used to work at a hospital as well, doing security there and stuff like that. That's actually where I read most of the 1,000. But anyway, so in my car, I was reading the first book that I ever like counted, like from the very time I started. The Eckhart Tolle, Robert Greene, and I got I was getting into it, and I was like, how am I going to remember all of these laws? I have to write some of this stuff down. This is like I would never forgive myself if I was to let any of this sort of slip away. And I know how easy that would be, because I was looking back at what I was studying in school, and I don't remember like a lot of that stuff. I mean, I remember reading books that made me want to pick up other books in school, and I remember like not being the love of reading never died, in school like it did for a lot of people. But, I never, I was never at that point. But then, those first few books just really like, I have to capture some of this. I can't let it, slip away into oblivion, right? I have to find some way to remember it. And then over time, my notes get better and better as I just get better at taking notes and knowing what to look for, and exactly, how to structure it so I can get the most out of it later on. So, yeah.
So what you've just touched on is the idea of note taking being a skill. So a lot of people might hear that you've read all of these books and be thinking, oh, what did you learn from the books themselves? Which is a legitimate question. But then there's also the meta skill of reading and the skill of note taking. So what do your notes look like for the last 50 books you've read compared to the first 50 books you've read? Or what is the experience of reading like for you over the last 50 books compared to the first 50 books? Like what's different?
Yeah. It's completely different. So like the last, like the most recent 50 are pretty good. I mean, they're more in depth. I start writing like an actual summary of the book, which I never did before. And they're just fuller notes, just more, they're direct quotations. Because before I might, just jot down like a sentence or two to remind me. But now I take the complete passage from the book, and I make sure that like the entire thing is in there, and I sort of elaborate on my own and sort of, make my own notes, like make the book, my own too. And I find, I mean, when some people, they ask like, do you remember everything that you read? I don't think anyone does. And it's not like it's not really a worthwhile goal to shoot for, to just sort of be able to memorize, somebody else's words, and like you're reciting for a test or something. Like there's no, once you become an adult, you read because you want to, and like, because what books can do for you. Like there's something in books that you want to make a part of your life. It's like you're like, no one's forcing you to take notes. So there's, the idea that you have to remember like every single thing so you can just regurgitate it later is false. Basically, no one expects you to, I mean, except unless you're like C.S. Lewis. They said that he's the creator of or the writer of Narnia, and they said that he could take a page from Paradise Lost, and like somebody could just read him a few lines from Milton's Paradise Lost, and he could just take it from there and recite the next, several pages. And not everyone can do that. I mean, C.S. Lewis is a genius, but you can, you don't have to remember word for word, but notes definitely helps. And if it's the right book, something stays with you. Like nothing is lost. Even if you, like sometimes, like even if you don't remember what, which book exactly some idea came from, that idea still is a part of you. Like I remember like years and years ago, basically I read somewhere, I don't remember where, but basically you can get anything that you want in life as long as you help enough other people to get what they want. And I don't remember which book that's from or where I read it, but it's been a guiding principle for me for the last years. I don't know where it comes from, but it's in there. Like I'm not gonna forget,
Yeah. And there's obviously a filtering process where
Mm-hmm.
where I think Alain de Botton, an author we both like,
Mm-hmm.
says something like, what determines how good a book is in large part how relevant the content is for where you're at in life right now. You know, that's a paraphrase, but it is this idea that, yes, sometimes like a book just seems to speak to us right at the right moment, you know, on wherever we are in life. And it's like that, those kinds of books are like really transformative.
Which is sort of an unnerving idea, because then you think that, you know, sure, great, I've read these 1,000 books, but then I could go back and easily just read them all again and get more out of them. You know, it's like it never ends. You know, it's you know, it's an achievement for sure. I mean, 1,000 books, not everyone does that, but at the same time, like there's, you know, there are hundreds of those that I could read again tomorrow, and it's like I never, you know, it's like I get completely new things out of them that I never saw before, because for me they weren't there before. I just wasn't looking for them. They weren't relevant to me, you know, when I first read them. You know, and I've been meaning to go back and reread some of those best books, like Walden. I still remember Walden was number 133 by Henry David Thoreau. Mm-hmm. I know for a fact, if I were to reread that book today, I would get so much out of it. And, you know, sure, I remember, you know, tons from that book, but I could easily go back and it's like, you know, Walden Part 2 for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So I want to, there's so many different interesting areas we can take this. So I'm assuming that a lot of people listening to this now are readers, find the value in books. And I definitely do. But obviously books are just one form of communication. Like ultimately, what is a book? A book is a particular thinker or author or person's best structured ideas around a certain topic that they're packaging for you to consume within, you know, a 5 to 30 hour window or something like that, which is like an incredible gift. It's like, hey, I've got a gift for you. Oh, what's that? My life's work. There you go. You know, it's like, thanks.
Yeah, that you can just read in a few hours. And, you know, Jim Quick has this sort of like snappy line. He says that you can download decades into days. And, you know, that's absolutely true. You know, but at the same time, this is a mistake that, you know, so many people have, like literally thousands of people have made ever since there have been humans. You know, ideas are not more important than people. You know, people come before ideas always. Like there's no comparison, right? And it's when people take the ideas and they sort of elevate them above the human, like the person standing in front of them or listening to them, or who they're listening to. That's just a huge mistake, you know.
Can you elaborate more on that? Like, because that's quite an interesting image. Mm-hmm. Like, what are the consequences of this, and what are some examples you can think of people doing this?
Oh, geez. Yeah, I mean, let's see. 20th century history, you know, basically. I mean, you have an enormously destructive century, and it's mostly because, you know, people tried to fit the world into their ideas, and any people that were outside of their ideas, it's like they didn't even exist, or they're not worthy of their ideas, and that's backwards. It's not the case at all.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So it's like me having a certain idea about the world being a certain way, or certain belief or certain truth that I think is important. Mm-hmm. And then instead of using my empathy and just saying like people are just intrinsically valuable no matter what, I then start saying that my idea is right. And if you're not conforming to it, you're less than, something like that.
Yeah. So, and you see, like, I'm not against people like Karl Marx at all. I mean, I think that, I mean, actually, I do need to read Capital, but like, I just haven't yet. I've only read Communist Manifesto. You know, like, I'm sure, like, I'm absolutely sure that, you know, some part, and maybe even a large part of his ideas are absolutely valid, and they're worthwhile, and they're good, solid ideas, and like well researched, well put together. You know, but it's people that took, you know, those ideas and that made people fit to them. You don't get things like, you know, the Soviet like prison camps, and like the that Solzhenitsyn wrote about in the Gulag Archipelago, you know, things like that. You don't get that happening if people are more important than ideas. You get that because, you know, people see something in Marx's ideas, and they think that they know what's right for everyone else, and they try and fit people into that mold, and that's not actually, it just doesn't work, you know.
Right. One of the things I'm curious about, and this is the idea opportunity cost. So I'm someone who has a lot of interests and a lot of different kind of practices that I want to get better at, certain skills that I want to learn. And I'm aware that whenever I'm learning something, I'm not learning something else. You know, whenever I'm pursuing one thing, I'm not pursuing a bunch of other things, right? And what's even worse is then there's the opportunity costs of learning inefficiently, right? So you could be spending hours learning this thing that's important to you, but just doing a really bad job with it. So then it's like, yeah, so that also sucks. So I know you have a lot of interests. Have you ever felt the sense that reading all of these books, well, I'm curious how much time you spend reading in the average day or week, which you can include in the answer. Have you ever felt that that's taken away from other important areas of your life?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a balance that I have to strike every single day, and everyone does. I mean, with their competing demands on their time and attention. Attention is one of like the most valuable of anyone's possessions. I mean, people give it away way too freely. And I mean that's why I don't answer calls from people I don't know. It's just I guard my attention. I try to limit my social media use. I mean, I'm like I have Instagram, all that, but I don't. I guard my attention and what I let in. Like the books that I read, the people I spend the most time with. And right now I probably read for between 6 and 7 hours a day. Pretty much 7 days a week.
Damn, that's a lot.
Some days, I mean, the lowest, I think, I mean, some days, of course, I don't read at all, maybe half an hour, but I don't think I've gone underneath half an hour in a very long time. And usually, like the vast majority of days, it's at least 5 hours, usually around 7. So yesterday, I mean, I track all my reading too. So yesterday I read 235 pages. I read for about 7 hours, and most of which outside, which resulted in this sunburn over half my face. I look like a Batman villain today, but no, it was about 7 hours. I was reading A History of Reading by Alberto Manguel, and let's see, Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert, and what else? A Deepness in the Sky. That was book number 963. Those 7 hours I split between those 7 books. But I mean, for every book that you read, it means that you're not reading every single other book. So I mean, that opportunity cost is horrifying. And actually, it reminds me of Walden. Funny enough, Thoreau. He said you have to read the best book that you know of right now, because you don't know when you'll get the chance to read it ever again if you don't read it right now. And that goes for everything. I mean, no matter what assumes primary importance in your life. I mean, you have to do it right now, because you don't know, if you're going to get another chance, right?
Yeah. So that's a great one. So
you sort of have to balance that too, because I mean, that's horrifying and disorienting on a level that's just stupid. So you can't drive yourself crazy thinking about it, but you do have to sort of, you do have to sort of how to be conscious of that. And but I mean, there are tons of things that, I'd love to learn how to skate. I was 27 years old before I learned how to swim. I just didn't make time for it. A whole bunch of things that I could have done, and that I'm getting too old for too. I mean, I'm 30, I'm pretty young, but there's gonna be a day when it's too late for me to learn how to surf or something. So it's that opportunity cost. Like, sure, I'm reading 7 hours a day now, but maybe later on I'm gonna really wish that I played more baseball or something. So
yeah. So I'd like to get into the details of reading. So I have some questions. How does the 7 hours of reading a day take shape in your routine? And how do you stay focused for that long? Because I've even heard Jordan Peterson say that after 3 hours, 3.5 hours of reading, he's done. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a few things. It definitely depends on what you're reading. So I mean, if you're reading something like Being in Nothingness by Jean-Paul Sartre, you're not gonna sit down for 7 hours and read that and get as much in the 7th hour as you did in the first. Like, there's just no way. And there's another two concepts. One called primacy and recency. And taking more breaks sort of lets you benefit from both of them. So primacy just means that you remember most, what you read first. So when you first sit down to read, the very first thing that you expose yourself to is going to stick in your mind for much longer. And then recency is basically the exact opposite of that. The most recent thing that you've read sticks with you as well. take more breaks, you get more primacy and more recency. And that effect, you get more out of your reading if you take more breaks, spread that over longer periods of time. First off, I mean, what I do, I don't really have to do this anymore because reading is automatic. For me, it's an identity. Like you don't have, it's just what I do during the day. But for somebody just getting who wants to read more, one of the best things I think is to make it a part of your schedule. Like actually physically write it down and commit to a time when you're going to just sit down and read. Because if it's not like in your schedule, you're just not going to do it, or some other thing's going to come up and you're just going to not have time. So you have to make time for it.
Yeah. So how do you give me some details? Like, when do you start reading? How do you take breaks? Like, what's the average reading day of Matt like?
Pretty much as soon as I wake up, I make my coffee. Sometimes even before breakfast, I'll start reading. So I will have been awake for maybe 20 minutes. I've got like a morning routine that I do, like stretching, a review, what I'm going to do during the day, water, music, some sort of movement, that sort of thing. Right as soon as I wake up, sort of set myself up in the right way. And then immediately it's coffee, and then sit down in my favorite chair and read. And I usually read for maybe 1 or 2 hours right at the beginning of my days, just so I feel like I've just from the start, you're not wondering when you're going to fit it in. It's already there. Like you've done it.
Right.
And then there on a day when I'll read like 7 or 8 hours, I'll do basically several of those, 1-2 hour chunks basically. And unless it's something that some book that I'm absolutely loving, and especially with fiction too. So if it's a fiction book that I'm just enjoying the story, I'm not sure, I'll pause to take notes on memorable passages or something that like a character says that I want to remember or go back to. But odds are I'm not going to take as many notes from a fiction book as I will on a nonfiction book. So I can just spend 2-3 hours without taking hardly any breaks. But if it's something like nonfiction or something that I'm going to immediately apply, I got to have more of that primacy and recency.
Okay, so give me some more practical stuff. So you might read for 1 to 2 hours as soon as you wake up. Then how long's your break before you read again?
Ideally, as little as possible. It's so ingrained in me, right? So I can't wait to get back to it.
Yeah.
Hemingway, he said that if you're struggling with writer's block, what he used to do is he would stop writing at the end of the day in the middle of a sentence. So he would know exactly where to start off when he got back to work writing the next day. And I sort of do that with reading as well. I finish reading at a part where I can't wait to get back into it, which takes some discipline because you want to actually just keep going and read more and read more. But if you can stop at a place that you can't wait to get back to, then you're just, exactly what you're going back to, and you just can't wait to get back there.
How do you focus for that long though? A lot of people listening to this will be thinking that reading anything more than 20 minutes might start to, there are distractions. There are, just so many things that happen in life that can easily just pull you out of a book.
Yeah. Environment absolutely matters. And the best way is if you can be in a place where lots of people are reading, they sort of respect reading, and they know that you're there to read, and you shouldn't be disturbed. Ideally, libraries would be fantastic places to read because everyone's there for the same purpose. Not to make loud noises because everyone's there to read. It absolutely matters. Focusing gets easier over time. I think nobody can. I don't want to say nobody, but if you have. I think it's even a skill that's transferable from sports or any sort of training. When you can devote your attention to anything for a longer period of time, it gets to be like a muscle that you strengthen over time. It's like you with jujitsu. You wouldn't have been able to do an hour-long training session in the very beginning, but maybe you could focus intensely for 20 minutes, and then you sort of build up over time. And again, you with meditation. Nobody sits down for 2 hours and meditates all at once on the very first day, or at least most people get burned out. but if you start small and build up over time. And I mean, like book number one for me out of those 963, that was 7 or 8 years ago. So I mean, I've had, almost a decade of practice focusing and being able to direct my attention to one thing.
What did your reading look like when you first started? Like the first 10 books, the first 20 books. How many hours a day were you reading them?
It was much the same, because back then I was still working security, right? So I was working 12-hour shifts, and I would actually I probably read more back then than I do now, because I've got my writing and videos and stuff like that. But it wouldn't be uncommon for me to read for about 10 hours or 10 and a half hours out of a 12-hour shift, and so I spent the whole time reading because I had no other responsibilities. Like I directed I constructed my life around reading. I didn't take the assignments that that would make me sort of have to respond to a whole bunch of different crises. I would set myself up to have 10 hours that I could read, and I was like, I'm not going to waste this time. I mean, I could sit here just being bored and just hating being here, or I could put it to some constructive purpose. Like, I have a horror of wasting my time and hence my life. So any time that I can just not do that, right? I hate wasting time.
Yeah. So this is where it kind of gets interesting from a kind of an intention place. If I had 10 hours a day in a job that I didn't need to do anything and I could choose what I did, my thinking wouldn't be to just read for 10 hours, even though I would want knowledge. My thinking would be, I have 10 hours. I could read for 3 hours. I could meditate for 1 hour. I could watch this documentary for 2 hours. I could journal for 30 minutes. I could study jujitsu for 1 hour, right? Like you could kind of like have this approach of like trying to do it all and do like multiple things within this. But it sounds like you didn't do that.
Well, that's actually probably why I read less today than I did then. Because before I was sort of a little bit restricted in what I could do. I mean, working in my car overnight, watching construction equipment, it wasn't something that I could just practice jujitsu on by the side of the road, right? It would look a little, but I could sit there with my book and read for 10 hours, right? So it's like what I can sort of get away with.
Gotcha.
And I could bring my laptop. I got writing done there. I've been doing that for the last few years. Like, while I still had to keep that old job, I would just get writing done for maybe 2 hours out of the 12, and then responsibilities would take 1 or 2 hours, sometimes more on bad nights, and then the rest of the time, or as much as possible, would be reading, right?
Yeah. Okay. So you were just you were working with your limitations. What would it mean to you if if your life got so chaotic that you could read still like a lot, but something like 2 hours a day? Would you be crushingly disappointed with that, or would you be like, no, okay, that's fine? Like, how would you respond to that? That's still way more than most people read. So
yeah, I mean, that's deprivation for me. But I mean, I would be grateful that I had those 2 hours. I mean, it's yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I mean, to use a Stoic term, it's a preferred indifferent. I would prefer to have 7 hours to read, but if I only had 2, I'm grateful for that. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be sort of ridden with anxiety or anything like that if I don't have that. It's a preferred indifferent, I guess you could say.
Yeah, because obviously life does have that kind of unpredictable quality to it, where we might, no matter how much we try to control our environment, there may be things that happen or responsibilities that get put onto us that changes our routine. And so, yeah.
Well, exactly. You just have to do the best you can. I mean, nobody can ask, literally nobody can ask for you to do more than your best. Like, that's actually, literally the most you can do,
Right. A bit of a sci-fi question.
Okay.
If we had a clone of you now that hadn't done this reading challenge, sitting here in a conversation with us, how do you think they would be different from you right now?
I don't even want to know.
You don't want to know. Do you think it would be substantial? But say they still had the same job and the same social life and the same everything else, but just the books were taken out. Instead of reading books, let's just say that they, oh, and by the way, for people listening to this thinking that 7 hours a day is a lot of time, well, I mean, how much time accumulatively do you spend on social media, Netflix, TV, right? It's probably around 7 hours or more. So, but yeah, say that the clone of you was just doing that, kind of like talking to friends on social media.
On what you just said, I mean, people can read a book a week if they wanted to by just watching one fewer television shows per night. I mean, like 45 minutes a day reading that over a week, you've read a single book, sometimes even less, right? So 52 books a year seems like this. I mean, it is like a great achievement. I don't, I'm not denigrating that at all, but 52 is achievable for a lot of people, I should say. So, and if you want to, I mean, you don't have to, and back to sort of your clone question, I would say that it's more about, the quality of lived experience and sort of the quality of my inner life, if that was sort of somehow impoverished. And I think it would be knowing what I know now or believing what I know now. But, somebody who's watched maybe, thousands of movies, if that's what they love more than anything in the entire world, I mean, they feel the same way about movies as I do about books. I don't think that that's a waste of a life at all. No. I mean, and like, I don't like, it would be a very snobbish thing to say, to believe that, for some reason, somebody who doesn't read books doesn't have the same sort of inner experience that someone who does. I think it's more likely, because I mean, books are a way to slow down and sort of to think about things, to carve out a spot in your day when you can actually sort of intelligently approach or sort of consciously approach, the things that are going on in your life, your everything that all of your experiences, right? But I don't think that you have to. It's not the single way. So like somebody who doesn't read, 200 books a year is not somehow worse off automatically, than someone who doesn't. I would be, if for some reason that I, in a single year, if I could read only maybe 20 books, I would think that that's a pretty bad year. But if somebody else who reads 20 books, that's, it depends on what they want and, what those books were, their goals.
Yeah.
Exactly. So.
Yeah, because your whole life is set up around reading.
Yeah.
So
exactly, because that's what I love to do.
For you to fill it in, whereas like ultimate on the deepest level, reading is just an experience, and there are multiple experiences that one can get from different aspects of life.
I mean, sensible people, make a living doing what they want to do or doing what they like to do, and spending time like doing the things that are important to them. Living according to their priorities, and so I mean, it's whatever's sensible for you, right? There's a saying, and I forget who said this first, but it's an idea that I agree with, but at the same time, like, the idea is basically if a child will, they can read Harry Potter at first, and then they'll move on to say C.S. Lewis or something, and then later on maybe they'll read Crime and Punishment if they're encouraged. And the idea is that once you instill this love of reading in a child, when they're reading these really simple books, they can advance to more difficult things. But at the same time, they don't have to advance at all. It's whatever that child loves to read. If that child reaches a level of, say, Arthur C. Clarke novels or Harry Potter, and they want to stay at that level, and they read 200 like young adult books a year, like that's completely fine. So there's no reason why you have to advance to like a higher level of reading. And like I happen to love, Plato and Marcus Aurelius and, Tolstoy and all those guys, but that's actually what I like to read, so.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Quentin Tarantino, the film director's distinction. He says that he doesn't make films, he makes movies, because that's what he loves. He loves movies. He loves movies with violence and drama and amazing characters. He's not interested in creating like really complicated artistic pieces, although his films are complex and artistic. He just does what he loves, and I really respect that. What's that?
Yeah. Seems to be working for him. I think he'll make it as a director one day.
Yeah. Can you be mindful when reading?
What do you mean exactly?
So what does mindfulness mean to you?
A certain quality of attention, I would say. It's difficult with reading, I would say. And there's a lot of stops and starts. It's very intellectual, sort of rational activity, which is sort of the opposite of mindfulness, you know, but you could be completely absorbed in your reading. I mean, that's a sort of kind of mindfulness, but I think that the quality of attention that you're thinking of with like traditional mindfulness sort of precludes a sort of really deep dive into whatever book you're reading, you know? But yeah, but you have to bring a certain level of attention to your reading, or else you're just not going to get as much out of it. Like, I mean, I test my reading speed quite a bit, and I try to improve and get a little bit faster. I do this really cool drill that supposedly helps. But I find that when I'm trying to increase my reading speed, a whole bunch of times I'll become conscious of the fact that, hey, I'm reading really fast, and then I'll get to the part or to the end of the paragraph. I don't remember anything of what I just read, because the whole time I was thinking how fast I was reading, you know. So it's very, very difficult, which is, again, I mean, it's why just distractions in your environment are so just deadly to reading, you know.
Yeah, no, yeah. So the mindfulness and reading question is there's no clear answer on this. It's just something that I'm fascinated by, because yeah, so like if you just say like mindfulness is paying attention to sense objects, including thoughts or the mind. And if you're really absorbed in a book, it's really difficult to remain mindful of your own thoughts. I guess you can kind of like flick in and out, but it's a state of kind of, it's in some ways a state of distraction in a way, because
absolutely.
Yeah, a book is.
Well, with meditation, a thought comes into your head or into your mind that you release it right away without attaching yourself to it. But if you're reading and a thought comes into your mind, you have to, like, if it's a good thought, you know, you have to attach to it. You have to engage with it in some way, you know, and maybe you want to write it down later. You want to take notes on that thought. You grab it and seize it, which is the exact opposite of meditation, whereby you would just release it right away, you know?
Well, yeah, but you don't have to release thoughts in meditation. You can still think thoughts, but you're paying attention to them, as opposed to being identified with them.
Yeah.
So you can use reason and rational thinking and be mindful of that process, but you're not lost in thought.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the distinction: lost in thought versus thinking and being aware that you're thinking. So would you say reading is more like a flow state? Like, how would you describe the experience of reading?
Yeah, I think the best books would be. Absolutely. Fahrenheit 451, definite flow state book for me. I think it's more likely with fiction than it is for nonfiction, because a lot of stops and starts in nonfiction. You read about an idea, you have an idea pop into your head or that's put there, and you have to sort of see, you know, what's the author trying to say? Has he said it? Do I agree with it? What's the significance? You know,
yeah.
You ask all these questions when you're reading. Whereas, you know, that can break up a flow state. But if it's a book like, you know, Fahrenheit 451, or, you know, something like The Forever War by Joe Haldeman, one of my favorite science fiction books of all time, definite flow state. You're pulled right along, you know.
One thing I'm interested in is, you said you had this technique to read faster, and I went through a phase of being really into speed reading and researching speed reading and practicing speed reading. And I think it just made me a better skimmer and a worse reader.
Yeah.
You know, like the skimming skills that I learned are very useful. Like I can break down large amounts of text quite quickly and look what's in there. But I suppose anyone could just learn to do that. So my question is, what is the value of reading more quickly, and why is that better than learning to read more slowly?
Absolutely depends on the book itself. You know, some books are meant to be read faster than others, and some you have to slow down, or else you're just going to miss something. Like, there's no way to read it fast. I'm thinking of books like the Bhagavad Gita, that's a book that you can't speed read. I mean, who speed reads the Gita? Like nobody. The Tao Te Ching as well, Lao Tzu. I mean, you can't speed read that. Like it's just it's totally antithetical to the purpose of reading a book like that. There's a book called Reading in the Brain by Stanislas Dehaene, and he's brain scientist, and he knows all about like the structure of the eye and how it connects to the brain and just what's physiologically possible with respect to reading speed. And he says that any claims to reading above 1,000 words per minute should be quote viewed with suspicion. So basically what he did, and he's top expert in his field, he says that above 1,000 words a minute would be just the claim of a charlatan, basically. And you have tons of people saying that they read much faster than that. There's a guy called Howard Berg, and he claims to be able to read 25,000 words per minute. And I saw a clip, and nothing against Howard Berg. I mean, he and I would get along great because he loves to read. I mean, we would be friends. But I mean, the idea that he could, get on television and claim to be able to read 25,000 words a minute with like a straight face, I just wouldn't be able to do it. He was on Fox News here in the US, and they had him live, and he was reading this like 1,500 page legislature bill or something. It was about the medical system in the US, and it was his big speed reading demonstration. And I'm not even making this up. You can look it up on YouTube. He puts on like a red headband, like he's like about to run a race, and he's flipping pages off this stack of stack of papers, and he's just like moving his head, and he gets to the very end, and he's all out of breath at the very end, and the news anchor asks him to describe what he read, and the guy's like, well, it's a complicated bill, and I will say that they're trying to do a lot, and it's unclear whether it'll work, but I think that the major pieces are there, and we'll just see how it works out. And it's like I could have said that, without even reading a single page, right? So I don't think, I mean, obviously he didn't read anything in that, or he didn't remember anything of what he just read, right? But man. Yes. Well, I'll put it this way. I mean, I've been working at bars for a long time now, right? 11 years, whatever. I mean, at this point, I can pretty much walk up to any woman at the bar anywhere, and I might get a little tiny bit nervous, but I'll be okay. Like I won't get blown out. Like I go up and I'll talk to her and I'll be fine. But I wish that I had the balls to stand up in front of like national TV and tell somebody, or tell like a nationwide audience that I could read 25,000 words a minute. It's like, man, like I wish I could do that.
But like, surely you don't, because that would be like a complete breach of integrity, right?
Yeah. I don't know how. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, I mean, his framing might be something like he's more interested in being a mentalist or psychological illusionist, where he's a magician in his own mind. But there actually was this guy Kim Peek, right? Do you know about this guy who could read rapidly? Yeah, like a page with each eye and memorize it.
I don't. Yeah, I think the Dehaene guy would have major issues with that. Even like some people claim that you can read 3 lines at once, like stacked on top of each other, and this guy and other people too, they say no, you can't do that. It's 1 line at a time. I mean, you have a little bit of peripheral vision, but it doesn't extend to like 3 lines at once, much less 2 different pages.
Yeah, but surely that guy is talking about a normal human brain, and right?
Yeah.
I mean, Kim Peek wasn't normal, right? No. He was memorizing phone books when he was about 3.
Unless it was like a physiological difference. I mean,
totally. I mean, he couldn't tie his own shoelaces, so he definitely was different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt about that.
But that's fascinating, because he might have been using completely different functions to read.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying it's impossible, and I mean, like, you might be able to skim, several thousand words per minute. I don't doubt that, I mean, and maybe you should, maybe just you're looking for just a few words on every page that, you're deciding whether or not you want to read this particular page in more detail. You flip through that page in like, a split second. But, to claim that you read and retain like this 25,000 words a minute, but anyways, and I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So the guy that is claiming to read 25,000 words a minute, I would obviously
there's a woman who claims 80,000. She lives in the Philippines or something.
Yeah, if a regular person is claiming this, then I'd be skeptical. But I mean, if Kim Peek, like he's obviously got some serious difficulties. He has zero intention to act and keep a lie alive. He's just like telling you what he's experiencing.
Well, exactly. And he doesn't have like
if you read a book on memory or something, like you might go, well, the short-term memory helps you remember X, Y, Z. But then Kim Peek seems to be able to memorize every song that he's ever heard, right? Just from one listen. So it's like, I don't know if we should be applying the same rules.
Like, he's not trying to sell you his system or something, which these guys are, right? But anyways.
So I wonder if
there's a Woody Allen joke about speed reading.
I like that.
Woody Allen. And he says, I took a speed reading course. I read War and Peace in 20 minutes. It was about Russia.
Yeah. It's a great one. I love Woody Allen. So yeah, but what's interesting about Kim Peek is it opens up the possibility that with Elon Musk's Neuralink, there could be ways of literally downloading information through books.
Yeah.
Like that would be pretty wild, right? Like just giving us.
Oh man, sign me up. Yeah. What an advantage. Like that's crazy. Yeah. I mean, Mark Twain said the person who doesn't read has no advantage over the person who can't read. And man, if you can just download, that'd be amazing.
So there's a few other things related to reading. I think we could have like a few podcasts where we break into different topics, but this is
sure.
So one is this idea of breadth versus depth, right? So if you look at the literature on learning, we know that say like 90% of the things that we learn get forgotten very quickly. Right, very quickly. So, and that's one of the complaints with reading. People do complain that I read this book, I don't really remember what it's about. And you can say, well, it affected you, but that's kind of a unsubstantiated claim, right? You're just kind of saying that because it makes sense to you to say that. It's not really like evident that that's true.
Yeah.
So, obviously the learning literature says that things like active recall or retrieval practice and spacing and interleaving of subjects, which is what you do when you read multiple books in a day, very good, and elaboration and reflection are all keys to truly understanding and having durable memory, which means that, we can read a book and tomorrow tell people what it's about, but can you tell people what it's about 2 months later? And so that's one of my kind of issues with reading too fast is that, like, how do you find time to create durable memory? So like, how do you think about that?
Sure. Well, I think one of the best ways to learn something is to teach someone else. I mean, so for most books that I read, at least like the very best ones, I immediately write about it or I make a YouTube video about it in some way. I transmit what I've learned to someone else. And in doing that, you have to put it into your own words in a way that makes sense to you and that you can explain it to others. Just being as simple as possible, as understandable for someone else as possible. And that goes beyond just being able to parrot the words from like the book itself. I mean, you'll be a much better teacher if you don't just like spit out the words. You actually like make them your own and actually sort of teach someone else. So I think right off, like teaching someone else is, the best thing that you could possibly do. But then, for nonfiction books, especially applying it immediately. I remember, Martine, I remember you telling me years ago that whenever he reads a new book, like immediately, like the first thing that he does after putting it down is find some way to apply it and use it. And then he just immediately does that. And I think that's great. I mean, I remember that as ever since you told me, and I was like, yeah, absolutely. So there's that for sure. I'd say just teaching it to someone else for sure. For people that don't remember, like years back, they probably don't have notes on that book, and they didn't review, that book either. If they had even sort of done a little bit of spaced repetition, maybe even gone back to their notes every few months, over those last few years, they'd remember quite a bit. So I think that if you want to remember something long term, you have to put it into note form and in your own words, like some way that you will actually remember, as opposed to just trying to write it down, verbatim from the book, right? But also, people who, you could also ask, for the movies that you watch, like, do you remember every scene in a movie? No, you maybe remember 15 minutes of it, years later. But does it make it a waste of time having watched that movie and enjoyed that movie? No, of course not. Same with reading.
I think with stories, there's an innate ability to remember better, like compared to like a nonfiction book.
Oh yeah.
Like like if you give me a subtle prompt with a film that I loved growing up, I kind of know the story to that. Same with fiction. But nonfiction, say you read like a 400-page book on productivity, that's so different from reading The Hobbit, right? Like in terms of the story, you can kind of flow through the events of The Hobbit in your mind and piece it back together because, we love story, we're storytelling creatures. But hard facts that are coming at you like in hundreds of bits of information a minute, that's a bit trickier to recall 4 months later if you've only been exposed to it once.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. So the answer there is to expose yourself to it more times, so let it actually sink in and do it, like same as teaching someone else, like actually using it in your own life. That's the same thing, right?
Yeah. So one of the book that I'm loving at the moment, Make It Stick. It's all about learning, where I'm just completely changing my ideas about learning. He says that there's a few authors, but a few cognitive scientists team up with a storyteller, actually, as it happens, to tell the story of learning. And he says that to learn, we need to test ourselves more. That's like vital.
Yep.
Self-testing, because testing gets rid of the illusion of mastery, because you get to see like, oh, how much do I actually know about this? Am I just telling myself that I get it? Yeah. And also it's retrieval practice. So you're making the memory more durable. The analogy that he gives is like a piece of string with cherries on, and retrieval practice is tying a knot at the bottom so the cherries don't fall off the string. Right. So like every time you learn something new, that's a cherry, but the cherry doesn't stick on the string if you don't retrieve it and tie the knot. And that kind of ties a knot in the mind. And I thought that was like a nice way to visualize it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's
an excellent book. Yeah, an excellent book that you and I have both read. I listened to it. You read it. Ultra Learning. Yeah. Who's it? Scott Young is the author. Yeah. Anyway, forced recall. Where like you don't look at your notes when you review it, you force yourself to come up with as much from your notes as you possibly can. So force yourself to remember before you actually go back and look at your notes, because if you just reading your notes over, it's more recognition than anything else. You can recognize it, and recognition feels the same as believing that you already know it, when in fact maybe you wouldn't know it if you didn't have the notes in front of you, which is why, obviously, which necessitates the forced recall in the first place, right? So yeah, because like recognition feels the same way as learning, but it's not,
But I also think one of the ways your book notes can be so useful for other people is because, a lot of people are struggling with finding the time to read full stop, let alone finding the time to read, then taking notes, then storing them and structuring them and reviewing them. So if I had read a book, right, let's just say Ultra Learning, I've read Ultra Learning, and I'm thinking, right, I want to refresh my memory or encode the information into a more durable state and to get rid of the forgetting curve by recalling, then I should sit down and try and think about all of the ideas discussed in that book and then test myself on it. That's where your book notes could come in really handy, because I could sit there for 5 minutes, do some journaling, think about it, and then I could look at your book notes and see like, oh, I completely forgot that core idea there. Like I wasn't even thinking about that. That's like fundamental to learning, right? And you could refresh me on that.
Well, I'm constantly surprised at like with my own notes, like from years back, like I'll read something that I read in 2015 and I totally forgot that I had read this, and it would have been lost forever if I didn't have those notes in the first place. And nothing that I do with note taking is especially complex either. So, you know, what I do basically when I'm reading either a physical book or an ebook, I have iNotes. Like I just use an iPhone. So I open up iNotes and I write, you know, the just what I want to make it into my notes, and then I just email those that iNote to myself, and I'd store it in just a simple Microsoft Word document on my computer at home. So it's nothing like too complicated, you know, and it's there. So
yeah,
like and this is actually from the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. He says like the perfect system that you never use is useless, you know, compared to the imperfect system that you actually use. Right?
Amazing quote.
Yeah.
So I also want to ask you about do you ever feel a sense of competitiveness with other well-read people?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, 100%. I do. Like whenever somebody like talks about like a book that I want to read that, you know, that they've read and I haven't, just, but at the same time, it's sort of, it's viewed on two different levels, I guess. And that's sort of how I view everything. So, you know, that one level, you know, like it's fantastic. It's fantastic that there are books out there that I haven't read. I mean, if I had read everything, that would be boring. I mean, there wouldn't be anything. There'd be no mountains ever. Like I'd be on the top of a mountain and I would just have nowhere to go, right? But at this, like, so having someone else who is further ahead of you, one, it shows you what's possible. Like anybody who has like a better physique than I do, which is possible, by the way. But like it's, I don't like, sure, I'm competitive and I want to reach where they've reached. But at the same time, like they've done it. So I know that it's possible and that I can do it. It's motivation and it's sort of a friendly competitiveness. And it's not like I'm not eaten away by anxiety, because I live on this other level as well, where, you know, it doesn't matter so much. You know, it's like competition is fun. It's inspiring and motivating, and it can demand more from you. You get more out of yourself when you demand more from yourself, when you compare yourself to where someone else is and you try to get there. You know, like that's what brings more out of you. But on this other level, you have to be just have to accept where you are right now and be okay with that, and realize that, you know, in however many years, you know, the universe is going to drift out into cosmic nothingness, and, you know, no one's going to be around to know whether, you know, this person's read 5,000 more books than you have, right? So
yeah, what about, so I was thinking, obviously there's the competitiveness of people that have read books that you haven't. Have you ever seen the film Good Will Hunting?
I haven't, but I feel like I would like it.
Right. So there's this famous scene in Good Will Hunting. So Will in Good Will Hunting is he's kind of like a genius, but dropped out of school. He's got that kind of vibe. Like he loves learning, he loves reading, he's super sharp, super bright, but is kind of a bit of a rogue, you know, and a bit of a rebel. And he gets into this famous discussion in a bar with a true kind of intellectual who's quite pompous and is quoting various things. And there's this amazing battle where Will, the rogue, the one that looks uneducated, shuts down the pompous intellectual by telling him he's not thinking for himself. The books that he's quoted, he's already read, that he disagrees with. And it's this amazing kind of like intellectual slam. And everyone's just like, oh yeah, Will got him. Do you ever come across people that are, you know, quote unquote, well-read, that are intellectuals, and they sort of feel like, you know, any kind of strong emotions, like a dislike of intellectuals or an admiration for them? Woody Allen, who you mentioned earlier, often made fun of intellectuals in his movies.
Yeah. One, I don't think being well-read exists anymore. I mean, I don't think that anybody can reasonably claim that they're well-read. First off, I mean, if someone comes up to you and claims that they're well-read, just run. You don't want to be friends with this person. You know, like they're nothing that they say is going to be, you know, anything you want to hear. You know what I mean? So like, it's never like, I would never say that about myself, because there's so many books out there. I mean, there's something like, like how many books published every single day, like hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions published every single day. And some of them are even worth reading. So, I mean, like, you're never going to get to the end. Like, you're never going to be like, what is well read? What does that even mean? It come to mean so many different things. It just doesn't mean anything anymore. And even though like the term intellectual too, I mean, one, never call yourself that. It's just like, I mean, it's socially, I don't know, it's basically a social mistake to call yourself an intellectual for one thing. No one's going to really want to stick around, and no one's going to enjoy, odds are no one's going to enjoy the company of someone who calls himself an intellectual, right? And it's sort of almost like an insult. Nassim Taleb, one person that I've read pretty much all of his books. I respect him to no end. People like, he disavows the term intellectual. Like, he does not want to be called one, even though he like more than reasonably could. And he views with suspicion anybody who calls themselves that, anything like that, right? Because it's so much, it's sort of removed from reality. Somebody who lives in their own head, like a pen pusher, in sort of in the terms of Zorba the Greek.
Mm-hmm.
Kazantzakis, one of my favorite writers, one of my favorite books too. You don't want to be a pen pusher. You want to be actively involved in life too. I mean, books are great, but books are not. Books aren't real. Like, books are, and ideas are not more important than people, like we talked about as well, right? I happen to read a lot because I love reading. I get a lot out of it, but the benefits that have come from reading are things that I've moved from the page, from the printed word into my real life. Like, that's where living happens, right? And life is just the highest value. I don't think anybody who would call themselves an intellectual or well-read really understands that, that life is the highest value, And yeah. I mean, you can have two people who've each read like 5,000 books, and, between them, maybe, and these 5,000 books being like the best books ever written, maybe, I don't know if you could ever say that objectively, but it's just, for instance, 5,000 books, each of the greatest books ever written, and maybe, 200 or 300 could be the same books between them, and they're both equally, like, neither one of them is well read, or they both are, and it's hard to guess. And like, the whole time where you're trying to figure out whether you're more read than someone else, or if someone else is like more intellectual than the other guy, it's time that you could instead spend reading, or just, be living your real actual life, So that's how I sort of feel like that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to conceive of it.
And it's like that, the two levels that I was talking about too. Like, obviously, like, I want to be, I do love having read, books that other people haven't. I mean, it's a thing that I'm proud of, I guess you could say. But at the same time, it doesn't mean anything.
Are you a book snob? I hope not. Come on.
No. But
yeah,
I read because I enjoy reading. Like, other people, watch movies because they love, watching movies. I mean, some people who, actually, one of my favorite books of all time. It's a memoir by this Canadian doctor, James Orbitsky. He was the past president of Doctors Without Borders. Anyway, so he spent like 40 years of his life in war zones, working with like Doctors Without Borders in Rwanda and Afghanistan, Somalia. Basically, he spent his entire life like sewing up machete wounds and hooking up feeding tubes to starving children. And I don't know how many like books he's read. Like he probably hasn't, read, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000 books or whatever. But I mean, what he's done with his life, I mean, it's spectacular. It's noble on a level that's just ridiculous. And somebody could look at him and say, well, he hasn't read, this. I don't understand how somebody can think that's a valid criticism of this guy's life choices, So
totally,
it's just a very snobbish way of looking at it. I sort of disavow snobbishness.
That's a good thing to disavow. Appreciate that. I think that's why we get along.
I certainly think so.
So oftentimes you see these, like the intellectual dark web, you see these thinkers, right? These thinkers that are coming along on YouTube, and you put a mic in front of them, you put them into a discussion, and the things they say are like fire. and they engage people, they fire people up, they make people interested in ideas. And invariably, they're all well read, like Jordan Peterson, the Weinstein brothers. Yeah, there's a lot of Ben Shapiro. There's a lot of people that are seemingly really well read. Daniel Schmachtenberger, Jordan Hall. There's just, John Vervaeke. They live very rich intellectual lives, and they often cite books as being influences to them. So what would you say is the difference between these individuals and yourself? Like, how do you see yourself as being different from them?
I don't really have enough information to answer that, I don't think.
Well, let's just take someone like Jordan Peterson, right? Like who you're aware of. Sure. He's very well read, right? And he attends interviews and gives talks, and he cites books a lot, right? Like he's always citing Jung and various psychological literature. So what do you think?
One of my favorites too.
Yeah, what do you think is there, what's the difference between you and Jordan Peterson in that way? Is it just that he wants to be in a public place to talk about these ideas, or like how do you see him? Because does that make sense?
No, not really. I'm sorry. I know he's referred to himself as an intellectual before, which I roll my eyes a little bit. But I mean, that being a little bit of context. I mean, I've read 12 Rules for Life 4 times and listened to him read it. I mean, it's one of my favorite books of all time. Now his latest one, Beyond Order, I found just ultimately way too pessimistic and defeatist for me. So like we certainly part ways on certain things. But I'm curious as to like what sort of what sense you mean similar.
So you take a few individuals, they read a lot of books, and then you put them on the internet and they fire people up with ideas. Okay. And they just speak in this way that is electric and can cause movements. You are doing exactly the same thing, right? So if I took you and I put you on a stage with Jordan Peterson and these other thinkers, would you feel out of place? And if the answer is why, yes, why would you feel out of place? And if the answer is no, why wouldn't you feel out of place? I'm just curious how you perceive yourself, because you're basically doing what they're doing, right? You're living an intellectual life. You're reading a lot of books and thinking a lot.
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't feel out of place. I mean, I could definitely, sit on the same stage and have, like worthwhile things to say and to listen to. But I wouldn't set myself up as an authority like they do or seem to want to. I would never do that. I'm more of like a Krishnamurti type person, where he says, explicitly, like, do not follow me. Someone like a Buddha person, I'm here with a few things to say, but don't set me as an authority, somebody that you just repeat without getting the sense of it. Don't automatically agree with what I say just because I'm saying it. You have to sort of take it in your own way, Yeah. Whereas with them, it's more like, I have all the answers. That's why I'm here on this stage. And I would never do that, And it's not to paint all of them with the same brush. I mean, I'm sure like they wouldn't all say that or believe that, but that's the sense that you get a lot of times. They don't have the sort of intellectual humility that you should have, And like for somebody who's read a lot of books, I mean, for me, like almost 1,000, like that's nothing compared to what there is out there to read. I mean, I'm closer to somebody who's read 0 books than I am to somebody who's read everything, Yeah, right. So yeah, but these people, like, they seem to set themselves up as this authority that should be listened to because they have these ideas. And they just make ideas more important than people, and that can never be true.
Do you think it also might have something to do with a kind of specialized reading thing, where I'm guessing that Jordan Peterson has read a lot of books specific to war and psychology and that kind of thing. So he's like talking from that frame. or like Noam Chomsky has probably read a lot of books, probably not many books on like productivity and self-improvement, but probably a lot of books
No.
on political science and history.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they've kind of created that kind of niche of expertise.
Mhm.
And how do you feel about that? Are you someone who's looking to become an expert in anything? Or are you just interested in general reading?
Uh, let's see. I certainly follow certain paths more than others. I've actually read quite a few books on Jordan Peterson's reading list. There was a time when I was trying to read them all, but then it got to the point where there were a few on there that I just wasn't interested in, so I couldn't force myself to read them. So that's no longer a goal of mine to read everything that he's read. But you do see certain, books like Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning, which was excellent. Very worth reading. He got me into reading the Gulag Archipelago, which is this like 3-volume, 2,000-page memoir about the Soviet prison camp systems. Before and during and after World War II, and it's one of like the best books, or the best 3 books that I've ever read, and it's because of him. But you notice with his reading, it definitely, like, he's talked about being depressed, and being like, especially after sort of coming into the public spotlight, and how these past few years have just not really been happy for him. And I want nothing but good things for this man. Like, he's done a lot for me, and I don't, I don't think he's right about everything, but of course not. Like, I'm not right about everything. That being said, the things that he's written about and the books that are on his list, that a depressed person read these books, like picked them up, or a depressed person, or somebody who's had these sort of, pessimistic, negative experiences would choose to write like that. And it got to be too much. Like, I was about halfway through Beyond Order, and it was just like, it was dragging. That was like, usually I don't force myself to finish books, but that one was one that I was just like, I have to sort of get to the end of this, because I really respect this guy. I know that, he's got a lot of worthwhile things to say, but it was just so, I don't know. It was, yeah, the ultimate pessimism was just, wasn't something that I could support, or even felt like. I was reading it, and I thought, there's no way that life is so dark and gloomy as he's portraying it, where so few opportunities for joy, and it was just enough is enough, right? And then I immediately, I don't remember if it was before or after. I think it was after that I first read Zorba the Greek, and it was just totally opposite. It was an affirmation of life and existence, as opposed to sort of a reluctant acceptance of life and existence. It was totally different reading experience. I gravitate towards the Kazantzakis and away from Peterson, at least now. I mean, like I said, 12 Rules for Life was amazing. Like, I read it 4 times, listened to him read it once. I got a lot out of it. I have pages and pages of notes. But then just the ultimate pessimism was just too much. I don't really take him as seriously now as I did before. I want the best for him. I want him to do okay. And I know that he's helped a lot of people, but he's just, I don't know. I don't think that he can do much for me anymore, but anyway.
The point you made about his outlook is pessimistic. We know that. Have you read Maps of Meaning?
I have.
Yeah. So I haven't read that, but I've heard a little bit about the origins of it. And like how difficult it was for him to write, and it took 15 years and like 3 hours a day of writing, and this
writing every day. Yeah.
Because he was obsessed by the idea of like how to prevent a Cold War, or something along those lines, or why it started, or so. I mean, he's clearly dug into a lot of the atrocities and evils of the human race, human nature. And, there is a lot of that going on, right? And you or I haven't experienced that firsthand. Like the doctors.
Neither is he.
Yeah, I know. So, well, I don't know, actually. I don't know what he's experienced, to be honest. But I know that he's had a child that has been severely, like, disabled, which is really tough. Which is not something that you or I have had. But
you're talking about Michaela.
Yeah. So yeah. Do you think that optimism for life could be a sense of privilege, where you've just haven't really experienced suffering properly, and you're just kind of.
No, I don't. And it's personal strength, of course, a certain attitude towards life. But you look at, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and then his latest book, it came out posthumously, of course, but it's Viktor Frankl's Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. You have somebody who's spent time in 4 different Nazi concentration camps, and he's lost his wife, parents, I think 2 of his children, 3 of his children. Anyway, he lost basically everyone to the Nazis. And then he spent like years and years in prison in the worst possible conditions. And then his book is called Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. And it's fundamentally optimistic. And you sort of contrast that with Peterson's Beyond Order, who has spent time in 0 concentration camps. And it's like, I don't want to say that I don't want to maybe you might think that I don't like Dr. Peterson. Like I do. Like,
no, I know you like him.
You know what I mean? I don't want to give the impression that I don't like. I am, so I'm definitely pro, Jordan Peterson. But it's just it was just the gloom, as opposed to somebody like Frankl, who was able to just go through like the worst of the worst, and say like, yes, life is worth living. And even Zorba the Greek, Nikos Kazantzakis, he wrote that in 1941. He was poor and starving in Sicily, I believe. I forget exactly where, but his very book is about. It's a sort of an ecstatic affirmation of being in existence and how great life is, and just what joy you can find in living. And like he wrote it, like it's a book about this person who loved being alive more than anything else in the entire world. And like he wrote that when he must have felt the exact opposite. Like, everything about his surroundings told him that he had no right to talk about, human happiness. And then he refused to submit to that sort of ultimate pessimism. And he wrote Zorba the Greek, and it's just, or something like that. And I just, just Peterson just doesn't, he hasn't, I don't know. And like there are parts of his books where he says, yes, life's worth living. He's not saying that anybody should do anything drastic, but it's sort of a reluctant yes, as opposed to like an emphatic yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. But, so one thing that's interesting to me about people like Viktor Frankl, and this is not me putting a claim out there, I'm just thinking out loud. I wonder to what degree Viktor Frankl's of the world are made by their philosophy and ideas versus their biology.
Yeah.
Right? Because, you take enough people and put them in concentration camps, you're going to find some people that respond with a lot of optimism just through genetics, upbringing, biology. And you're going to find...
It's genetic, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're going to find people that just... they don't have that. No matter how much philosophy they read, they just don't have that. The world can become very gray and motivation can go very quickly.
Yeah. I mentioned Jordan Peterson's Depression, and that book that you suggested that was amazing, Darren Brown's Happy. I read that I think last year or 2 years ago, and he says, I mean, if you had the same sort of like under the same psychological conditions as someone else, you would act pretty much the same as they would. So I think there's something to that. And again, ideas are not more important than people, but there is something if you can hold an idea, that's sort of, more on the yes side, and I mean, Bergson, Nikos Kazantzakis, he studied at the Sorbonne under Henry Bergson. So he's got this sort of Bergsonian vitalism. You read books like Creative Evolution by Bergson, and it's all about that. So he's obviously taken this sort of Bergsonian philosophy and put it into Zorba the Greek, So.
Yeah. I see you as someone who's just very kind of naturally optimistic, though. I don't get a sense that you were pessimistic and prone to depression and anxiety before you found books.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's an interesting point. So that might explain why you gravitate towards certain themes in books more than others.
Yeah. very possibly. Yeah, I forget where this idea comes from, but sort of a happiness set point. It might be Martin Seligman, sort of the positive psychology sort of branch.
Mhm.
Just how, some people have this sort of genetic predisposition to happiness, right? They have they come into the world with like a set point of happiness, right? And it's sort of, they always sort of, there are conditions that can sort of impact that one way or the other, but they sort of always return to that baseline, sort of like a regression to the mean type situation.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the happiness set point. I think that's interesting. Where it gets more complicated is when there is the idea of illness that's implemented. So things like depression and anxiety, I think, have oftentimes a biological root. So, for example, Michaela Peterson, she suffered from severe depression due to inflammation due to allergies in a diet, for example. Which, if you were to look at her and go, well, your happiness set point is low, you would be missing the fact that you're not aware of, that you're actually just eating the wrong diet, which actually gets interesting, right? Like there's always something more to discover. So if you are listening to this and you're not happy, keep searching. There could be something obvious to change.
I don't think it's a personal failing of somebody that they're unhappy. Like, it's not, there's a certain part of it that is up to them, and a certain part that's not. Conditions definitely, impact it at some level. Of course, there's the happiness set point. I know sort of autonomy and freedom makes up a lot of human happiness as well. So like that's big. And obviously ideas are very powerful. That as well. So, positive sort of like affirmational, like just yay saying ideas, do make an impact. Like they do change people's lives, right? So like people under the sway of positive ideas are going to react more positively to their situations, but
yeah.
So back what you said, or what we were talking about with competition and envy and all that. One reason why, like, I'm never, like, I don't experience envy or jealousy whatsoever, basically. Like they're just not emotions that I feel. And like, that's a huge claim. I realize that, but it's just not how I feel. And one reason for that is I feel like if you're going to be if you want somebody else's life, you can't pick and choose what parts of their life you want and what parts you want to take for yourself. You have to sort of accept being all of that person. So, if somebody has like I don't know, some like really fantastic car that you want, you have to sort of like, yeah, sure, you can have that for yourself, but you also have to look like that person. You have to have that person's voice, their personal history, their future prospects, their environment, their, the thoughts that are going on in their head. You have to accept everything about them, right? And I don't think there's anyone basically in the entire world that I would want to be instead of myself. Like there's literally no one that I'd rather be. And like, that's a fantastic place to get to, I think. And it's not insurmountable. Like, it doesn't matter. Like that's more of an intellectual thing, like an attitude or a position, and not like a predisposition. Like it's a choice that you could make that you would not rather be anyone else except yourself.
Totally. Yeah. That's a really great point about taking on all of the other person on none of the other person. You can't pick and choose what you take from another person.
Yeah, exactly.
Envy can become quite interesting though, depending on your social life. So the more busy and sort of chaotic and flourishing your social life, and the more invested you get and wrapped up into the kind of social game, I think there are more opportunities for envy than if you live a more reclusive intellectual life.
Yeah, I can see that being the case.
Yeah, because there's just, if you don't spend time around people, there can be no competition around people.
Yeah.
Quite simply, like there's nothing to compare yourself to. There's no love interests or love triangles or people that have better skills than you or people that are working on exactly the same things as you and have kind of just like got slightly better than you at that. But yeah, Alain de Botton talks about envy a lot, and he says that envy is a very valuable emotion because it can tell you what you should be focusing on, which I think is great.
Yep. Yeah, it has some utility, and same with guilt too. But at the same time, it's also very destructive as well. So, I mean, guilt, I mean, it's the sort of anticipatory guilt where you know that if you commit this particular action, you're going to feel bad and you're going to have these sort of repercussions, these negative ones, then it makes you not do that horrible thing. So you know that you're going to feel guilty. So the presence of guilt makes you do pro-social things. So, I mean, in a social sense, you know, guilt is good, but it can also be just this incredibly destructive and just downright useless emotion that can trip a lot of people up, right, and derail their entire lives.
Oh yeah, totally. Guilt can be very toxic.
Yeah.
What tips would you give to people that are really struggling to read on a daily basis?
Schedule it, like I said earlier. Yeah, always have a book with you. You look up photos of Stephen King on the internet, and he's out in like at baseball games, just in the stands reading a book. He listens to audiobooks in the car. I do that sometimes. I have 5 different reading apps on my phone, and I use all of them. So like no matter where I go, if I have my phone with me, I've got, you know, like reading material. And I guess taking advantage of those small little spots during the day, like 5-10 minutes here and there, that you can just let slip away, and just do nothing with them. But if you have a book with you and you know exactly where you are in that book and you can't wait to get back to it, you know, you can just pick it up and resume from where you left off, right? So
what percentage of
it can add up too. I mean, like I have a theory. It's not substantiated or anything, but it's not unreasonable to suggest that you waste about 5 minutes out of every average hour that you're awake. So, I mean, say you're awake for 16 hours, you waste 5 minutes every hour that you could have spent reading or doing something that's important to you that has value. You know, that's like an hour and a half. I mean, not exactly, but about an hour and a half every single day that you're just wasting, like for no reason. And worse, I mean, if like there are people who spend like 2-3 hours a day just gossiping. You know, 2 or 3 hours a day spread over, you know, over a lifetime is literally thousands of books. So you just have to sort of decide what's more important, you know?
Yeah, that's a great tip. What percentage, I wanted to know, of the books that you've read are fiction versus nonfiction?
Today, I'm catching up on fiction because I realize how, like, well, one, incredible it is, and just how much value it has. Before, I used to think that fiction was only sort of good for enjoyment and sort of, you know, but now I realize like the best fiction is absolutely true. You know, maybe like it didn't happen, you know, these people aren't real or these characters aren't real, but it's psychologically true, or there's some real value in it. And, you know, even like well, I mean, I won't talk more about Zorba the Greek, but I mean, Zorba the Greek is fiction, like it never happened. But it's absolutely true. Like there's so much in that book, right? And if you don't read fiction at all, you're just missing out on a lot of that. So nowadays it's closer to 50-50 now than it ever has been before. Before it was maybe like 80%, 20%, you know, maybe even 85% nonfiction and 15% fiction. But I'm sort of rectifying that as I get older, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's good to hear.
And actually, I forgot to mention this earlier. There's a book that I read near the very beginning. It's called The Happiness of Pursuit by Chris Guillebeau. And basically it's about quests, basically. And what he has done is he's visited every single country in the world. So at the time that he wrote that book, it was like 192 countries, right? So that whole time that he was trying to do this, it gave him something to shoot for, something to orient his life around. And basically the idea of that book was that, you know, if you have something like that in your own life, it adds so much. So it was about that time when I read The Happiness of Pursuit that I set a goal of 1,000 books. And like, that was the genesis of that goal. That was really the reason why I picked that number 1,000 and went for it. So it definitely sort of, whatever you can do to sort of incentivize yourself, sort of put something in front of you that you're trying to move towards. It has a lot of value and utility.
I think you're going to hit 1,000 books and then just give up reading forever.
Yeah.
That's going to happen.
1,000, never going to read another word.
Yeah. Okay. That's powerful. And so what I want to do with this conversation is I want to do a few more with you, like do a few parts, because I still feel like there's so much more to talk about. Do you feel that too?
Oh, absolutely.
I
Yeah.
feel like there's just like I have like so many more questions about the content of the books, about your note-taking systems,
Hmm.
about your life outside of reading. Like I know
Sure.
that you train a lot and you have amazing morning routines and this kind of thing. So I want to keep this conversation going. But this has been let's wrap this one up. And this has been an interesting one because what I've done in this conversation for people listening, I hope you've enjoyed that, is, and I have another question as well that's just come up, but what I've tried to do is try to ask these questions that a child might ask when someone comes along and they've done something quite extraordinary, you know, and what you've done is extraordinary, you know, it's amazing, it's epic, it's admirable. I love what you've done, you know, like as someone who really values discipline and learning, it's incredible. Like the amount of focus that you've generated, the amount of distractions that you've had to put away, the amount of like perseverance that you've displayed in pursuing this challenge is awesome. So I really respect your efforts for doing
Smiling on the inside and the outside.
that.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like it's just it's amazing. It's so good. It's
My real goal is 10,000, but that'll take
that's
a long time. So we'll see.
well, you're getting more efficient. So
Yeah.
so yeah, Epictetus, he has this, I think it's in the Enchiridion, he has this idea that I've always loved, where he says that when you first proclaim that you're going to be a philosopher, people will mock you. And if you quit, they'll mock you twice as much. But if you persevere, they will ask you how you became a philosopher. And that's kind of whenever I think of any kind of arduous, long journey, that analogy comes to mind. It's like, don't quit,
Yeah.
just keep going.
Yeah. What is it like? First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then you win.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah.
Stoicism reworded. So yeah,
Yeah.
a couple more quick fire questions.
Yeah. Sure.
Has
Sure.
reading improved? Because if you read On Writing by Stephen King, he comes straight out the
That's
gate.
excellent.
Yeah, amazing book. He comes straight out the gate. If you want to be a writer, you've got to read or write 5 hours a day. You know, like
Yeah.
just throws it out there. Very down to earth advice. Um, you've read a lot of books, and every English school teacher will tell you, you know, if you want to become a better writer, read more books. If you want to improve your vocabulary, read more books. How has reading all of these books improved your writing skills, your communication skills, and your grammar and vocabulary?
Mhm. Well, first off, I mean, the ideas, like if you apply like the best ideas from the best books, your life will get better, like 100%. Like that's just how it works. Um, Another thing, I mean, I never have writer's block anymore because I always have source material to work from and just ideas just crashing around in there. It's like a fireworks display inside my mind every single day. So like I don't run out of ideas, and that by taking notes and by having, you know, the output of all your reading just, you know, just laying around that you can access at any time you want. If you have it just, you know, within reach, you're not going to be at a loss for what to write about or what to think about. So, you know, 100% just like take notes and have them on hand. You know, doing it has improved my reading a lot as well. Because a lot of, I mean, at first when you don't know as many words, you have to stop more often, and sort of you get tripped up by the words that you don't know. And if you have to do that, if you have to go to the dictionary every few sentences, you're not going to read very fast at all. But now, after, you know, almost reading 1,000 books, you know, I know pretty much every single word, not every single word, but, you know, a decent, like a really good portion of all the words that any author is going to use in any sort of English book. So I don't have to slow down going back to a dictionary or, you know, figuring out what a specific word actually means. So doing all of this reading is going to make you a better reader. And it's going to train your focus as well, which is it has done for me. Yeah, same with writing as well. Just doing it again and again. And yeah, I mean, even the writing that I've done 3-4 years ago, it is horrendous compared to what I've been able to manage today. And I know like 5 years from now, I'll look back on what I'm writing today and it's going to be garbage. So, you never get to like the final, point. I mean, yeah, behind the mountains ahead of you are just more mountains. So,
Yeah, that makes sense. How many books are you reading a month at the moment?
I'll answer that, but yeah, just back to the thing too,
Yeah.
process as well. So, and this goes for anything, like sticking to like a fitness program or what have you. Like you have to enjoy what you're doing on a moment to moment basis. If you're ever going to stick with it in the long run. So if I had this goal to read 1,000 books, but I hated reading, I would never have done it. I was only able to do this because I was, I developed a love of reading itself. So it was never a homework assignment for me to read all these books. It was something that I wanted to do, and I saw the benefits, and I did it, right? And same thing with working out. I mean, I actually enjoy working out. Like I don't have to drag myself to the gym, so I go more often, and I experience the results from that. As opposed to someone who hates working out but has this goal to have like a 6-pack, right? It's just not going to happen. I mean, it could, but they could hate their lives. So as much as possible, you want to make the process as enjoyable as possible, right? And if you're reading the kind of stuff that you actually want to read, and not books that are just forced on you, the process is going to be a lot more enjoyable, and then you're more likely to reach that reading goal.
Mm-hmm.
As for your question, geez, probably between 15 and 20. This year, I've read 63 books this year. So in 5 months, that's 12 books a month, I guess. Pretty slow reading year. I gotta speed up a little bit, but yeah.
Let's just take last month. How many books did you read last month?
13, I believe.
13.
Yeah. And again, too, like it's longer books. I mean, last year I read 179. But one of them was Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, which is like 1,000-page book, and a difficult book too. As well, The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen, that was like 800 pages. And this year, I mean, the book that I just finished, A Deepness in the Sky by Werner Vinge, that's 970 pages. So, if I had read like shorter books, like The Enchiridion or something, it would have been 5 books as opposed to just one, So like just number of books is sort of misleading, or can be.
The Enchiridion is a book with 5,000 pages written in invisible ink. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, that's cool. So you've already peppered the answers in throughout this conversation, but let's get the distillation, because I know that people listening are going to be inspired at this point and be like, okay, cool. How can I read? Tell me. You give me direct advice. How can I read with my busy lifestyle? 13. Let's moderate it, right? Let's just go for 5 books a month.
5 books a month.
Yeah.
That's okay. So it's not as hard as you might think. So one, I mean, with a goal like that, you want to break it down. So it's like a little more than a book a week. We said before that it's one less TV program per week, and you've read a book a week. So you can absolutely do it. Switch up formats for sure. So some of my books that I read are books that I actually just listen to. So I'm reading Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty right now. So I have that when I'm washing dishes and where I'm eating or something, right? So you want to fill spaces like that, driving to the gym, like doing stuff that that you don't really have to think about, like putting laundry away, just stick an audiobook and you'll get some of that in there. If you have any sort of commute to work, even better if you take the bus or something, you just always have a book with you. Basically never be caught without a book. Yeah, there's a t-shirt that I saw. I don't own it, but I would buy it. It says, "If I can't bring my book, I'm not going." Mm-hmm. Sort of the attitude that you have to take. So always have a book with you. Like I said, I've got 5 book apps on my phone. So one is Audible, one's a library app called Overdrive, iBooks, which came with my phone, Scribd, and Kindle. So a couple of those are free. A couple of those you have to pay for, but if you have a smartphone, you have access to millions of books. So basically, most people have a smartphone, so most people have access to millions of books. That's fantastic. Schedule it, like I said. So scheduling it is going to be huge. Like if it's not in your schedule, it's just not going to happen. Like this podcast, it wasn't in our schedule, so it didn't happen. But we put it in the schedule, and then it happened. So we right now are evidence of the power of scheduling.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. There's that. Up to a certain point, you can improve your reading speed. There are tons of things you can do about that. I don't know if you want to. Maybe that's a topic for another time. But there are definitely ways you can increase the speed at which you read.
Yeah, I think what I'm more interested in is I think the reason why people are not reading many books is because they're not reading, not because they're not reading fast enough.
Yeah. No. Exactly. Yeah. I would imagine that some people are actually reading too fast.
Yeah.
I know, like I've been guilty of that for sure. Like I've read books faster than I should have, and I always regret it.
So, all right. So I'm just thinking of my own life, getting some personal therapy here.
Okay.
I don't watch TV and I don't watch films. And I listen to audiobooks when I commute, for sure. Sometimes I listen to music or a podcast if I'm really into that. If it's like one that's like, yeah, like I really want to listen to this podcast episode. But I think I'm trying to think of my distractions. Maybe my distractions might be like, YouTube rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Like kind of like going on YouTube and then like clicking one video to the next video. And that's time I could spend reading. Like, do you ever go on YouTube rabbit holes? Like, do you just switch out all distractions with reading?
There's so many great YouTube channels. They won't let us sleep.
Yeah.
They have us. They won't let us go. No, I feel it. Absolutely. You have to tear yourself away, and the platforms themselves, like their algorithms are designed to keep you there, to show you like video after video of things that you would be extremely interested in. It's their business model. And like I said, I mean, it's attention. Like attention is your most valuable possession, and people give it up way too freely. Another thing I think too is reading several books at once, and ideally different kinds of books as well. So right now I'm reading A History of Reading by Alberto Manguel, and Stillness Speaks by Eckhart Tolle, and Time for the Stars by Robert Heinlein. So it's a science fiction book. I'm also reading a biography of Frederick Douglass. So those are 4 very, very different books, and Madame Bovary as well. So 5 really different books, and I'm in the mood for a different one at different times. So if I was only reading one and I just was not in the mood for like a 700-page biography of Frederick Douglass, I wouldn't read at all, as opposed to, if I had 2 books on the go, like maybe I don't want to read a biography right now, but I'll read a really fast science fiction book right now. If I have those 2 books on at the same time, I'm going to read more. And people can do that too. I mean, people think that they can't read, more than one book at a time. They absolutely can. I mean, you think about the time you spent in school. I mean, you went from math class to English class to to whatever else, and you were learning different things, reading different things at different point in the same day. So people can do that. You can learn that way.
How many hours would you estimate one needs to spend reading to get through 4 books, 5 books a month?
It absolutely depends on the book, of course. It's almost, there's too many variables or factors.
Because obviously, it's impossible to answer, but we know that you have a really deep intuition from reference experience.
Sure.
So let's just say a popular book that's awesome, Atomic Habits. It's highly readable.
I love that.
Very useful.
Yeah.
Something like that, right? Like
that took me a long time, because I think I have something like 6 or 7 pages of notes on that. So I was constantly closing the book. I read it on my phone on Kindle, I think. So I was constantly closing the book and taking notes and then going back to it. So it took me a long time. I don't know. Something like Atomic Habits is going to take people longer if they're really, and as well, there's so many great things in that book too that you can immediately apply. It's so applicable. So, a lot of the time that I spent reading that book was thinking about ways that I could put his advice into practice, which added to my reading time too. So, maybe that's not a good one to read if you want to fly through it. That's one that deserves to be read a little bit slowly. Same thing with 12 Rules for Life. anything by Simone Weil. She's a French intellectual. I mean that in the best sense of that word. You don't want to rush her books either. She's just fantastic. Same as Martha Nussbaum, she's like a contemporary philosopher. Her books are excellent. And to really get the most out of them, you can't really, like, they're not skimmable books. I don't know if that answers your question, but like you said, it's an unanswerable question.
But like, give me, but I kind of feel like that it kind of is, you can give me a range, like, because say that my goal is to read 4 books a month, and you're asking me to schedule some time in my calendar. I don't know how much time to schedule. Like, do I schedule 10 minutes a day? Do I schedule 4 hours a day?
Yeah, something like Fahrenheit 451. It's really short. It's under 200 pages, I think. So that one, just a couple of hours. Like, somebody reading for 45 minutes a day is going to read that in less than a week. And again, it's fiction. It flies right along. And if you love reading, if you love books themselves, it's a book about books, and it's just a book. It's like Bradbury said that it's a love letter to books. So like that one, you're going to fly through if you love it. Yeah.
So I'm trying to find the kind of the rules or the principles that I can apply. And obviously there's going to be a period of experimentation, but what would be the initial experiment? And something like 1 hour a day of focused reading scheduled. And then on top of that, adding in reading when you're going about your day, listening to audiobooks, and providing the books are not unusually long or difficult, that would lead to something like 4 books a month. Correct?
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, no, easily. Yeah.
Easily, as a minimum.
Yeah, I think, people are capable of reading much more than that. Obviously, I don't know how busy people are, like what takes up the most time, and different people have different priorities. Like we talked about too. But if your priority is to read 4 books a month, then it's I don't want to say it's easy, but it's simple. Like it's very doable. Like there are exact things that you can do, and then if you do those things, it'll happen. How easy that is depends on the person and the motivation and the books they're reading, but it's very simple. Like, just spend more time reading. It all comes down to time. And like I said before, with wasting 5 minutes every hour, that's an hour and a half that you're just wasting doing nothing. So. Yeah,
this is an interesting area.
Yeah, that's like 100 books a year, just not wasting time.
Yeah.
So.
But to really not waste time, you have to have certain mental skills, such as bringing your focus back to your intention and things like that.
Yeah, and an awareness of how little time you actually have. How short a day is, and how short a lifetime is as well. So don't freak yourself out, but at the same time, like, be very, very conscious of that. And your time, like, time is so much more valuable than money or anything else. There's a book called Die with Zero by Bill Perkins that I read. Actually, I recommended it to you, but it's not like a fantastic book. I read it, I got a lot from it. But what he says is, he talks about these 3 resources that you sort of have to balance in order to get the most out of your life. And it's, time, money, and health. And, all 3 are important. So he's not saying that you can skip it. Like, if you, like, ideally you should have, lots of time, money, and health. Like, that's, the best human life is made possible if you have lots of those things. But money's the one that you can always make more of, like, at any time. And you can spend money, to a certain extent, to buy back your health. People do that. They spend their entire life, they spend their time and their health making money, and then they spend their money, buying back their health, at the end, when it's just not useful for them.
Yeah.
So, like, just balance those 3 things. But time is the only thing of those 3 that you can never, ever, ever get back. And health, to a certain extent, there's a certain point at which you can't get your health back. If you've gone too far, but for time, like, there's 0 chance of getting any of it back, like, ever. And that's horrifying to think about, but it's also very focusing. And it just allows you to cut everything extraneous from your life and just really focus and dial in on what's actually important, And like, you're still going to waste time. I wasted time earlier today. But yeah, like,
Yeah. So those three things, money, health, and time.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting to me about those three things is that strategically, I wonder what the best time is to focus on each of those things, right?
Well,
Because
that's exactly what that book Die with Zero is about.
okay.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
you said that you can always make money at any point, but I mean, like, really, like, is it that easy? It doesn't seem that easy to me that you can just make money. I mean, sure, you can probably get a
Easy,
job, but it's not like
easier. Yeah.
yeah, easier, but still
Especially today.
potentially easier, but still potentially extremely difficult. Like,
Mhm.
if you don't have certain qualifications and you're very busy and you have children to feed, yeah, just go out and make money isn't so
Yeah.
easy.
But it's impossible to get time back. And if you've had like a stroke or something, or you get like Alzheimer's or something, that's impossible to get your health back. But with money, it's still possible, regardless of, like, irrespective of the difficulty, you know?
Yes, kind of, I think. Yeah. But
Yeah.
obviously if you've lost your health, then you won't be able to get money. So it's like an interesting thing as
Yeah.
well, right?
Arthur Schopenhauer, this, back, 100 plus years ago, this 19th century, but he said that a healthy beggar is happier than an ailing king, which is just as true then as it is now. So like, somebody with like no money, but who has his health, is going to be so much happier than somebody with everything, every sort of possession, but no health with which to enjoy it. And that's basically what Bill Perkins says. There's a season in your life, when you're young, you shouldn't be so worried about money, because you have your entire lifetime. I mean, you look at like the richest people in the world, they're all old. It's just like, do you want to trade your health for that? You want to trade your life just to get, dollars, like ones and zeros in your bank account? Or do you actually want to like live, So it's not immediately obvious that trading your time and your health for money is a worthwhile thing. It's sort of, it's
Yeah.
counter. Like, I don't believe that.
I would say it would be a case by case basis, because like, a year of focused effort to set yourself financially up for life seems, for example, like a trade-off that would make sense.
Yeah.
But you
exactly.
wouldn't want to become a slave to the system and then realize that you haven't lived and now you have money. Like, so
yeah.
I
mean, I could read for 16 hours a day and then not write anything and not get paid for anything, but that would work for a couple months, and then I'd be
so yeah, that's an interesting area of discussion. And also
balance, and it takes thought and planning.
Yeah, and for people listening as well, is that I just want to make the point that you definitely can be happy if you have illness. There are definitely strategies out there, and a lot of illness is just bad luck as well. It's not something that you've made a mistake, or there's something wrong with you and some kind of moral issue. A lot of illness is just bad luck. And like, I find that mindfulness is one of the best ways to kind of deal with aggravating pain or annoyance.
And it's like back what I said about the two levels. Like, is it your fault? Maybe not. Like, it's probably not your fault that you got sick or something bad happened to you, but is it your responsibility, to choose your response? Yes, it is. So it's those two things, like,
super important.
You're not to blame. Like, it's like, you don't have, like, you're not at fault, but you still have to do something about it. You have to respond, so.
Yeah, because I do see a little bit of, obviously marketers in the biohacking health industry to get their message across kind of convey it sometimes like, because you're a bad person, you're not healthy, right? It's like part of the message.
You see it on both sides too. I mean, people think that poor people are poor because they don't work hard, or people are rich because they cheated somebody, and it's like, you don't know anything about either one of those people, right? It's like you have one data point, So.
There's a podcast compilation by Naval, amazing thinker.
Ravikant. Oh yeah. The Almanac of Naval Ravikant is amazing. It's one that you should definitely read. I mean, I hate, like, I never say like you should read this, but knowing what I know about you, I think you should read this.
So we created this tweet storm on how
Yeah.
to get rich, and then he turned it into, it's like a 3.5 hour podcast now where he's going through all of the tweets.
Yeah.
And I've got friends that have listened to this like 50 times. It's just packed full of value. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And
that's actually what the Almanac is. It's a
actually,
distillation of everything. Yeah.
Yeah, he actually makes a claim, which I thought was interesting, about people like worship Elon Musk's productivity, but like the shopkeeper down the road from you probably works just as hard. I thought that was just like a great little point to think about.
Absolutely.
Not that you shouldn't admire Elon Musk. What he's doing is obviously incredible, but there are hardworking people everywhere, like everywhere, absolutely everywhere.
Well, it's funny, like lots of people like respect him because of like his money or something, but like that, I think that's one of the least impressive things about him. You know what I mean? It's like the vision, and just how he's bringing everything together. He's making humanity like an interplanetary species. That's incredible. He's bringing like just power and like energy, I mean, to more people, like making more possible. I think that's spectacular. Like just the money that he's made from that is just sort of incidental. Like it has nothing to do with how great he is, But, and again, talking about,
I don't think there's been a single article written about Elon Musk that hasn't mentioned billionaire, right?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, it's a selling. I mean, it's a you read something with the title with billionaire in the title, and it's eyeball catching, right? I mean, I don't fault anyone for that at all, but at the same time, it's like it's just incidental to who he is, and not guilt, but envy. Do you want everything about Elon Musk's life? Absolutely not. For every time he, like, I mean, if you want to host SNL, sure, that's great, but you also have to have like Asperger's, a marriage that was destroyed. I mean, obviously he doesn't have much time to see like his kids. He's got like 4 or 5 of them. I don't know exactly, but there's a lot about his life that I wouldn't want, even though I respect like what he's done to an extraordinary degree. It's just, he's not an object of envy for me, like at all, because I don't want his life,
You definitely want those rockets though, right? Come on.
Oh, absolutely. I want a space. My very first investment ever was in Virgin Galactic. I bought a bunch of shares in them. And Kathy Wood, she's got a new ETF called ARC-X. And it's all basically, she invests in everything to do with space and any industry related to space. It's packed, or she invests in it with her ETF. I've got a bunch of shares within that too. It's just, I just pile money into it. One of my goals, besides reading 10,000 books, is to own part of outright part of a space travel company or a space exploration company. I want to be part of it. I want to be right there. So yeah, rockets are definitely, yeah.
Yeah, you might have to drop from reading 20 books a month to maybe like 10, but I think you can do it.
I think I can make it work.
Yeah, you can figure out a way.
We'll see. I've got a long time. We'll talk about this in a future conversation, but anybody who's like, I don't know, people live much longer now, and you don't know like the exponential gains that that we'll receive in like health and longevity and things like that. It's not unreasonable for people who are 50 years old now to live for another 100 years. So I have 100-year goals or 100-year plans. And I think that anybody under the age of like 50 now should definitely have some sort of long range plan that they're working towards, something that's beyond like their next car or their next house, something that's bigger than that and takes maybe longer to get to. And they don't have to, like, it's just a good thing to do, I think, for some people. But yeah, long term, like you got to think long term, especially how everything moves so fast now, But
that's a great note to end it on. I can't wait for continuing the conversation. This has been really fun. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the patience you've had with my probing questions. Thanks.
It's okay. That's all right. No, thanks. Thanks for having me on here. It's really cool. I know we've been talking about it for a long time, and it's finally happened, and it was fun. And like you said, I mean, we've got plenty more to talk about. We haven't even like scratched the surface. So hopefully we'll get back to doing this some other time.
Do you have any final words to be remembered by for this outing?
No, not really. I'll say something from, I mentioned Frederick Douglass I'm reading his biography, and I forget who wrote it, David Wright or something. Anyway, but one of the, for people who don't know who Frederick Douglass is, he was a former slave back in the 19th century in the United States. He became one of the famous or most famous speakers ever, basically, most famous in like the abolitionist movement in the United States. And Frederick Douglass is like the man. But anyway, one of the things that he said, I say this all the time. He says that, and he taught himself how to read, by the way. So like nobody was able to teach him how to read. Nobody would really want to, because he was this slave, and like they deliberately kept them, unlettered, like, and illiterate. But he taught himself how to read, and he became one of like the greatest writers and speakers, basically in American letters. And what he said is that once you learn to read, you will be forever free. And coming from him, I thought that was pretty spectacular. It's something I absolutely believe. So, once you learn to read, or once you learn to read more, you will be forever free. So
beautiful.
Yeah, in every sense of that term too.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate the time.
Yeah. Thank you to you, man.